Well, good morning, church. Good to be with you in the Lord's house. Thank you so much, Brother Bob, and all those who lead us in worship through the marvelous gift of music. So good to be back. I want to take a couple of minutes of personal privilege, if I may, while you're finding Matthew's Gospel. That is, in practicing with students, turn to Matthew, chapter 14, 15, and 16, and Brother Bill can quote it all, so there's no reason for me to read it. But I will take only selected verses from those chapters. Please leave your Bible open if you have one, or your instrument dialed up, or whatever you use, because you'll need to follow along in this long narrative to understand or to follow some of the points that I intend to make. Now back to the personal point of privilege. It's been a decade, a little over a decade, since you had to endure me Sunday after Sunday and before you called Dr. Parker. And in that 10 years, you have been blessed abundantly. Amen? And you have a good and godly pastor and staff. I love them all, appreciate them very, very much. And I had to bribe Dr. Parker to get me the chance to come back and preach. It didn't cost me too much, but it was an investment that I hope will be worthwhile. Now, he's asked me before, and I just haven't been able to come. Since being here, in God's own providence, led by your pastor, by the way, I need to mention that. Here's the quick story. I'm working away one day in my office at Midwestern. Ken calls. We're talking about various and sundry things related to ministry. And he said, by the way, have you ever considered being the director of missions for Clay Platte Baptist Association? And I said, no. And he said, would you be willing to consider it? And I said, no. I thought that was the end of that. 2 no's should get it done. He called back in a couple of weeks in his very nonchalant, non-aggressive way. He said, oh, by the way, have you thought any more about the director of missions position? And I said, no. He said, well, have you even prayed about it? I said, no. But I will, just out of respect for you. I will pray about it. So I did what I do sometimes. I made a list. Professors do that, I guess. And I drew a line down the center of a sheet of paper, and I put over here all the reasons why I shouldn't become the director of missions for Clay Platte, and over here on this other side, all the reasons I should. There was nothing on this side. But all the reasons that I shouldn't were selfish. Every last one of them. Purely selfish. And I thought, oh, no. Here's another transition in the course of my life. I'm old as dirt. I was thinking about retiring and going to Alabama and fish for a living, but I said, well, I'll meet with the council and see what they say. And I told them what I thought, and they asked me to become their director of missions, and now here I am. Loving it. Don't know how to define it, understand it, or do it. But it's a good place to be for me. I'm still teaching at Midwestern. My load will be reduced in January to 15 hours a year versus 26, and that will help. That's what I think about it too, by the way. That's probably the best expression of the chaos in which I live that I've ever heard. I feel like the proverbial termite in a yo-yo sometimes. I don't know which way's up and which way's down, but I'm glad to be here. I'm going to read selectively from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21, and then I'm going to read chapter 15, verses 32 through 38, and chapter 16, verse 16. So let me turn our attention, if I could, please, to the text. Matthew 14:13. Now when Jesus heard, and what he had heard is that Herod was assuming that Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead, which puts a target on Jesus' back, prematurely so. He, being Jesus, withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard, they followed him on foot from the cities, and literally the Greek text says they were running to where he was. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate, and the hour is late, so send the crowds away that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go away. End of sentence in the Greek text. Beginning of a new sentence, you give them to eat. And you is in the emphatic position, and it's plural. Okay, guys, feed them. They said to him, we have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, bring them to me. And that also is emphatic at the end of the sentence. Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed. And breaking the bread, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They, the disciples, picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. That's one for each disciple. And there were about 5,000 men who ate, besides women and children. Now, 15:32 through 38, and I'm going to fill in the gap as I move through the passage. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I feel compassion for the people, because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want them to be sent away hungry, for they might faint in the way. The disciples said to him, where would we get so many loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a crowd? Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few small fish. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and giving thanks, he broke them and started giving them to the disciples, and the disciples to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 7 large baskets full. And those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And in the classic verse, chapter 16, verse 16, Jesus questioned, whom do you say that I am? Simon Peter says, the Christ. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, to fill this in, you're going to need your Bible open, or at least listen very carefully. First, if I may, a parable, a fairy tale, if you wish, from the Middle Ages. 2 bears walking along one day, doing what bears do, looking for something to eat, ventured into a lush, ripe, prosperous, plentiful berry patch and filled their bellies. Oh, it was good. One turned to the other and said, that was tasty. They waddled off as bears do, and they came to a stream. And when they got to the stream, they discovered that the salmon were running. And they ate, and they ate, and they ate until they could eat no more. And they waddled off, one saying to the other, my, what a day. What a great, tasty meal. They decided it was time for a nap, as bears are prone to do. So they ventured off into the woods, and one began to rub himself against the tree to comfort himself before he laid down for his nap. The tree falls over, and it's full of honey. And one puzzled bear looks at the other one and says, and I quote, it appears that our opportunity exceeds our capacities. Thus, the disciples must have felt that way when they heard Jesus say, when there are thousands of people gathered there on that place where he has been teaching and healing and doing what Jesus does, you feed them. They must have been overwhelmed with the realization that the opportunity exceeded their abilities, which is an honest and a correct evaluation of the circumstances that existed. I face similar opportunities and circumstances, and so do you. I face them as a professor. I face them as a director of missions. I face them as a part of 2 counties in the state of Missouri, of the 4 counties that hold or house or are occupied by 1/2 the lost people in the whole state. 4 counties in the state of Missouri have 1/2 of the lost population of this state, and Clay County and Platte County happen to be 2 of those. As a matter of fact, the 5th most unevangelized and reached county of the 114 counties in the state of Missouri is Clay County. The 2nd most unreached county in 114 counties is Platte County. The population growth has been phenomenal. There have been, over the last 10 years, 14,750 new family dwellings established in these 2 counties. That's approximately, if the numbers are right, 1,475 new family units come into Clay County and Platte County every single year. That's 123 a month. That's 28 per week. That's 4 new families move into these 2 counties every single day. We have the same number of congregations and the same number, less significant numbers of churches evangelizing and reaching out to those communities. Opportunities exceed our capacity. I can look back over the 10 years that Dr. Parker has been your pastor, and I have seen the growth in this church and also seen the growth in this community. And I commend you, you're doing well, but how is it that we can meet such tremendous needs with such limited resources? That's the point that I want to bring from the message this morning. I believe God is able, and I believe we can if we will. We can take full advantage of every opportunity the Lord affords us if we will notice three things and apply these three things in our own walks and ministry out of the passage that I've read. And before I get too far, let me remind you that it's puzzling, or it was puzzling to me for years. Why the feeding of the 5,000, ... and the feeding of the 4,000? Well, they stand as an inclusive, they're brackets. It's Matthew's way of saying in a typical rabbinic style, pay attention to this. This is how God meets extraordinary needs and how God accomplishes His mission through ordinary people. We can meet every need that we face and be ordinary in our person when we will realize and understand that what we cannot do, He can. Because He can, there is no challenge we face that is too great. Because He can, there is no responsibility we cannot meet. Because He can, there is no excuse for us being willing to take things as they are and simply sit passively by, wringing our hands, hoping that somebody will do something. Because He can. I base that in the stories of the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000, and what is immediately clear to me that Matthew, writing to a Jewish audience, is reflecting what that Jewish audience would have recognized in any and all of the miracles of Jesus. The first thing you recognize is that this is a desolate place. This is a desperately lonely place, an isolated place, and there is not a McDonald's on every corner. There's just nothing there to eat. And these people are indeed perishing. It should take you back to the Exodus in your mind if you're thinking as a Jew would think, and thinking Old Testament as well as New Testament, and that Jesus is the promised fulfillment of the Messiah spoken of so often in the Old Testament. And in the Exodus experience, of course, you have much that speaks to the provision of God. And the more obvious and clear declaration is given that every morning when the Hebrews would arise from their night's rest, they would throw back their tent flaps and look out upon a sea of what is it? Or manna. It was the provision that God made that only God could make. They did not have time to till the earth. They had no resources for growing crops. They had to simply depend upon God to make provisions that only God could provide. And as God fed the children of Israel in their wilderness, isolation, wandering in need, God in the person of Jesus Christ is standing there by the seaside on that amphitheater plain, saying in essence by His word and by His deed, I am that I am. I am God in your midst. I can meet every need. Now, following the story of Jesus feeding the multitudes, and the 12 baskets being collected and the disciples being given a significant lesson, you have this unusual or somewhat peculiar scene that is given to us by Matthew, where Jesus insists that the disciples get in a boat and head to the other side of the sea, rowing against the current, against the storm, against the wind. In the fourth watch, somewhere between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning, they see Jesus walking toward them on the water, and they think it's a ghost. And they panicked. And Jesus calls out and says, don't be afraid, it is I. Simon Peter, well, if it's you, Lord, bid me come to you on the water. Come on, son. The Master comes to them walking on the water as though it were a granite surface. And a man of little faith, and a faith that would soon fail, discovers that what Jesus can do, he can do by faith. The lesson doesn't last very long, but at least it's there, and it's there for us to see. Now, here's the significant thing. I think, I hope, I do believe that ties this with the feeding of those two multitudes. As God provided manna in the wilderness, God provided water from a rock. And if you look at the redemptive story, you'll find a reoccurring theme regarding water. When the children of Israel have left Egypt, Pharaoh has conjured in his mind that maybe God, Yahweh God, doesn't live out in the wilderness, so maybe my gods can overcome this Hebrew God, especially if he's not there. So I'll go out and slay a few Hebrews and call it even. And God there positions himself between the Egyptian army and the children of Israel, and Moses, by faith, under the command of God, speaks. Moses indeed acts by faith, and the waters begin to divide. The wind blows and the sea moves back and the dry land appears and the children of Israel walk across on dry land. You're getting an image here. The way out, by way of the water. When Joshua comes to the Jordan River and there is that campaign that is his, that is offered in a season of high waters and floods, and the river has flooded across the multiple acres and the tangled briars and all of the undergrowth and all the driftwood and everything that is there that could stand in the way is in the way. But God causes the waters to stand up there in Adam, and the children of Israel go across the Jordan River in conquest of the land. Elisha come to the Jordan, strike with the mantle. The waters part, they move simply across. What's being said is that this God who provides for your need, this God who provides for your deliverance, this God who provided you the way of occupation, this God who provides the evidence of His presence is the God of nature. And it all yields to Him. He is the one who indeed is the creator of all that is, and all that is under His divine authority. It's there in every miracle that is wrought. You go on into the passage and you'll read about those who come to Jesus and ask just that He might walk by, that they might touch the hem of His garment, and they would be healed. The God of sustenance, the God of redemption, the God of deliverance, the God of conquest, the God of healing, the reversing of all the adverse consequences of sin and transgression and the fall, all yields and bows to His authority and His power. You see, He's God. Nature yields to Him. Go a little bit further and you'll find in the passage that I won't take the time to read, it's there in chapter 15, you'll find the Syrophoenician woman, a Canaanite woman, comes to Jesus imploring Him and begging Him, and she comes having this statement on her lips, "Have mercy on me, Lord, O Son of David." Back in chapter 14, when Simon Peter is rescued by Jesus and comes into the boat, the text says, "And those who were in the boat worship him saying, 'You certainly are the Son of God.'" This passage is permeated with divine titles. He is God. And He is God not limited by geography, not limited by disease, not limited even by death, not limited by racial prejudice, not limited by geography, not limited by a lack of understanding, not limited by a faulty and failing faith. He is God. And He can do what we can't do. He can and wills to do more than we oftentimes are willing to agree that He can do. One more thing from the context, you'll notice that this did not occur in a perfect environment. The Pharisees come to Jesus on the heels of much that He has said and done. And the scribes. Now these are bosom buddies. The scribes are the lawyers and the Pharisees are the judges. This is jurisprudence in the first century, capitalized with every imaginable conception of what authority and mandated diction could offer. "You," they would say. "How do you," they would say, joining their voices, bringing together all of the persuasion of their political influence and their sociological impact upon the culture of the day, the fear of the common people, their lofty degrees, their assumed postures of authority, their titles, their education, their pedigree, all of that they bring and accuse Jesus, and He simply answers them in straightforward terms. Not altering His course, not deferring Him in His destiny, not doing anything whatsoever to interfere in essence with the mission of God. Later on in the passage you have the Pharisees and the scribes coming. Now there's about as much love and compassion between the Pharisees and the scribes as there is between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Denver Broncos. These people don't like one another. The Sadducees would have the Pharisees go away with their superstitious ideas and their backward, antiquated ways. The Sadducees had political influence and power, and that the high priest that occupies that position is nothing but a pawn of Rome, but available to him is the authority of Rome. And the Pharisees, on the other hand, would have expelled every single one of them, and all those were sympathetic to the Romans. These people did not like one another. But they come together in a concerted effort. They synchronize their resources and their means, and they come to challenge Jesus. And then you have a Gentile woman, a descendant of the Canaanites, who comes in with a demonized child, and even that authority buckles and yields to the very command of the voice of the one who spoke into existence all that is, and His name is Jesus. And I'm telling you, He is God. And there is nothing that is beyond his reach, nothing beyond his understanding, nothing beyond his ability, nothing beyond his compassion and care, and absolutely nothing beyond his power to reverse for the purposes and mission of good. He is God. He can. I can't. We can't, but he can. Secondly, he cares. There in the passage twice, it's captured in the English word compassion. Because he's God, he cares, and he cares because he's God. And the opportunities we face are of greater, profound impact upon him than they are on us. I have driven from church to church, and sometimes riding a Harley from church to church, praying in parking lots and looking and wondering. I have met with congregations that have as few as 10 people in this association, and now I have the privilege of meeting with you. I have seen, I have heard, my heart aches for what's out there and what's not out there because I care. I was meeting with my administrative assistant one day. We were thinking about the annual meeting, talking about the annual meeting, and I said, I just simply can't find the words. She said, try, it matters. Because it does. Because it matters to God. In the text, Jesus is moved with compassion. Literally, it means that his bowels were moved. He was physically disturbed because he cares. In a course that I teach, well, actually in a couple of courses that I teach, I do a vignette or a series of lectures regarding worldview. How do you see the world? How do you view the world? The lenses through which you look at the world dictate how you see that world. And I'm trying to convince them that the only way to see that world is through a Christian worldview. And there are 12 classic fundamental questions that have to be asked and answered before a worldview can actually be defined and determined. And the first one, if there is a God, what is he like? Now that gives birth to years of study and reading and Bible study. He's given his character to us in the pages of Revelation, but what is he like? Let me say for this morning's message, he cares. The first time that surfaces is there in the garden. In the midst of the splendor and the glory of absolute perfection, there was one problem. Adam didn't have a helpmeet. He had named every creature in the fields, all those that fly, those that are in the sea. He had named them all. He had defined their character, and there was not a single one there suitable for him. And God cared and brought to him his bride, the love of his life, the apple of his eye. Indeed, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh and everything else that you can imagine that's Christian. Again, it happens in Genesis chapter 3 when the calamity of the collapse and fall has occurred and the devil has won his bid and our hearts have been sealed with the destiny of rebellion against God and in the pursuit of God for ourselves. And God shows up in the garden, and omniscience has not been fooled by what's taken place. He says, Adam, where are you? As a matter of fact, the text says he cried, Adam, where are you? And the heart of God is reflected in that appeal. He needs for Adam to understand where he is because God cares. On into the history of redemption as the drama unfolds, the children of Israel are crying out in their destitute circumstances of being Egyptian slaves. And God says to Moses, I have heard the petitions and the cries of my people, and it has moved my heart to respond, and I'm going to deliver them. Get ready, because before you is an impossible mission, but I care, and I can, and he did. All across the pages of the Old Testament, God provided a priestly line because he cares that men might have indeed a way of communing and receiving from God his grace and offering to God worship that he is due. In the seasons of the prophets, those men who came with voices and broken hearts and with broken souls and bent bodies would say, he cares. All across the ages of time, God has proven it. There's one story I must reflect to quickly in Philippians chapter 1, verse 8. For God is my witness, how I long for you all with the affection of Christ. The Apostle Paul wrote that. I long for you all, the church at Philippi, all the believers there. I long for you all with an affection that has its origins in Jesus, that is the very affection of Jesus himself, the one who looked at the multitudes and wept because they were like sheep without a shepherd. This kind of caring is contagious. And the nearer one is to Jesus, the more it will capture you. I said in a meeting last week, I said in a lot of meetings doing this, and with a pastor sitting to my right, another pastor sitting beneath, just below where he was, or at the other end of the table from where he was, who is serving a struggling small congregation over in Excelsior Springs, two pastors over from First Baptist Kansas City, North Kansas City, sitting there, us talking about how we can partner to serve this small church and help this small church. And Doug Ritchie, the pastor of Pisgah Baptist Church, gave one of the most eloquent speeches I think I've ever heard about a pastor's heart. About looking at the people and seeing them in need, seeing them as they are, and longing for them to be beyond where they are, longing for them to know how to better live their lives, longing for them to have the realization of God's love for them and the power that enables them to live a better life, how to escape the drudgery and treachery of being bound to their own sinfulness and fallenness. I heard his heart cry, and I saw tears come in his eye, and I'm saying, this pastor walks with Jesus. He has a heart for people. He sees them and he cares. It's your reputation to be the same. It's your church staff's reputation to be the same. We can meet any and every need that appears before us when we're fully convinced that Jesus can do what we cannot do, and when we are captured with the same compassion and longing to be servants of Christ and servants of humanity that arrested God in heaven and sent his Son Jesus to die on the cross in our place. We can meet every need because he can when we can't, and the needs are far greater than we can ever achieve. We can because he cares, and when we care as he does, we'll be willing then to do what needs to be done last, and that is we'll have to become his chosen and useful servants. Every need can be met because God can when we can't. And the needs are divine in nature. They're divine in their demands. We can because God cares, and we can because he's chosen to use us. Back to that verse that I read just a little while ago where Jesus says emphatically, you give them something to eat. That's plural, every one of you. Every one of us has the privilege of giving what God can bless and multiply to be given to meet every single need. I used to wonder why Jesus had them all sit down or lay down when he got ready to feed them. Practical reasons, of course. You've got thousands of people out here on this plain. They're hungry. They're milling around. Children are tired and fatigued and doing what children do when they get tired and fatigued, and what Baptist preachers do as well, whine and moan. Mothers are fretting and worrying. Fathers are wondering, what in the world are we going to do? How are we going to have anything to eat to feed these babies? And Jesus very calmly says to the disciples, just have them all sit down. Just have them all lay down. And that's how they would normally eat. And they're all laying there, and it's just a sea of humanity on those green plush plains, says Mark's gospel. And there's 12 guys running around like ants on a sugar pile. They run over here and they grab a little bread, and then they grab a few fish, and they run off over here and they give something to this little group. All the bread and all the fish is gone. They run back over, they get another basket, and they go over here and they give something to this little group. And all the fish and all the bread's gone. They keep going back, and they keep going back to the same one. He's the only one not hurrying, scurrying. He's the only one standing, simply handing. Jesus had them sit down so everyone would be fully informed the source of the blessings is Christ. Jesus took what was there and he turned it into more than enough for every need that had to be met. Do you know how that happened? Well, by divine power, but by the willingness of someone to give what they had. And that given is multiplied and given to an abundance that exceeds every single need. When Dr. Parker asked me about doing this particular job, I said to myself, I don't even know what a director of missions does. I'm still not sure. I don't know what I would do. Well, I'm trying a few things. We'll see how that works next Sunday night. I don't know why you want this of me, God. I had other plans. I haven't gotten an answer. Other than doing what I'm doing right now is the greatest thing I think I've ever tried to do. And I love it probably as much or more than anything else that God has ever asked me to do. And I mean both Midwestern and the Director of Missions position, being here, trying to preach, all of this. And it all stems back to, and it all comes back to one question that I had to answer. God, am I willing to trust you to do what I cannot do? And am I willing to give you whatever I have left to give? And I'm trying to get there. But whatever's left, I want to give it to Him. Because in that giving, opportunity is afforded for God to bless through the inadequate, insufficient fallenness of any person, just exactly the way the choir is saying. I never have been more amazed. Every time I come, you haven't seen something that's right in line with what I'm going to be preaching. It has to be a God thing. But this is the point that I need to get to. He can when we can't. He must because we can't. He cares, and if we care, we will join Him in that passion and compassion, and we will yield and give ourselves absolutely and completely to Him for Him to use as He wishes all of us. If we can do that, then He can do anything He purposes to do in the county, in these 2 counties and these 40-odd churches. We can do that. But there's one last thing I need to say, and I'll do it by way of illustration. In the time of the Saxon kings, there was a rebellion in one of the kingdoms, and a group of rebels had decided that they would usurp the authority of the king and they would take over the empire. Immediately, the king responded with quick and severe military judgment and justice on his opponents. Most had been defeated. Many had run away, and in the evening you could see their campfires all out across his kingdom as he looked from the towers of his castle. The king went to one of the towers, and in the archway of the tower he placed a candle and lit it. And then he commissioned heralds to go to each campfire of the enemy and say in essence something like this: as long as the candle is burning, clemency is offered. As long as the candle is burning, if you will step forward and lay down your arms, you will be forgiven, and you can return to your fields and return to your harvest and return to your labors. But when the candle is extinguished, the opportunity has passed. My friends, the candle is burning. Darkness encroaches upon our culture at a more rapid pace than I ever imagined. Falsehood, misrepresentations, hypocrisy, lies, heresy, the attack and the onslaught of Satan in every manifest form of darkness that I can imagine has erupted and continues to explode in our very midst, and we seem to sit by and think the candle will always be burning. People will perish without Christ if we don't tell them the story. People will die without Jesus and meet eternity without a Savior if we don't tell them the story. Opportunity will sweep over us like a tidal wave if we don't act now. My appeal: do you believe He can? I do. I believe He can do anything and everything that is beyond what we can do. Do you believe He cares? I know He does. I'm standing here, aren't I? Do you believe that He uses people like us? Yes, He does. More and less, the greater and the least. He'll use anyone and everyone who brings what they have, fully surrendered to Him, to the mission of making His story known. I believe He will. I believe He can. I believe He cares. I believe you care. And my appeal is, let's join hands and get it done. Let's unite our hearts. Let's unite around one mission: being and making disciples of Jesus Christ. I believe that He will bless that effort, and I believe that you will be a part of it.